This all started because of that CRT TV my uncle had given me. He was a hoarder, and my family did an intervention type meeting with him to convince him of his bad habits. He finally gave up and agreed to throw all the junk he has accumulated over the past 10 years away. It just so happened that he owned an old mint condition CRT, and I always wanted to own one. Call me a hipster or whatever, but I wanted to use it to play retro games, To get that feeling that the very first day I brought and plugged it in, it gave me a nasty static shock once. I touched the on-off button, nothing too bad, but it caught me off guard. Well, I guess old enough trying to store it in a dusty mess of a room for over a decade or like that. I shrugged and turned it on. The sight of fuzzy pixelated static made me smirk, and soon enough I plugged in an old VCR. And a Super Nintendo I got from a flea market last summer. I only had 2 VHS tapes and 1 SNES cartridge, but I was happy to just see it all working. I decided to test the VCR first. I put the first tape, an old copy of Disney's Lion King, and pressed play. I sat back and watched as familiar. Music and Disney logo appeared on screen. There was some distortion, but the tape was in good condition. I really liked how it was going. I finally got to use outdated technology to my heart's content with a proper display. Until something weird happened. The iconic circle of life scene where Simba was being raised in the air by Rafiki cut abruptly. The screen became black void for a while, but the sound was still playing. However, while the screen going black annoyed me, the sound I've heard during that blackout made me unnerved. I never heard this audio ever before or after and had no idea how it got there, but it must have been an alternate version of the missing scene, cut from the final release. This was the only rational explanation I could muster, but that still didn't explain how it got onto my copy, which was by all means a proper commercially available copy. The song faded away quicker than in the original scene, and some murmuring mixed in with animal sounds was heard, as if all the gathered animals began to speculate about something that just happened. Then, the weirdest thing occurred. I could now hear how someone seems to walk up to whatever the scene was supposed to be focused on at this point. Slow, punctual, and painfully clear footsteps were becoming louder and louder. Then, they stopped. I guess someone important must have made an appearance, but who? All the other sounds stopped suddenly, and worse noise, a cacophony of furious animal roars. Human screams of all sorts and tones began to blast out of the TV. It was so sudden and jarring that it made me jump. The horrible sounds went on, without any sign of stopping. I endured about a minute of this before I quickly ejected the tape, trembling with confusion. What was that all about? I asked myself aloud, my sight stiffly focused on the now static-filled screen. Some prank, I thought. Yeah, that's it. Some asshole dubbed the tape over with this scene to give someone a scare, right? Again, what else could that be? I had no other possibilities in mind, and in all honesty, still don't. So, I just put the tape away and grabbed the other. That one was Killers from Space, and old, and rather bad. Even in the opinion of low-budget 50s horror aficionados. Sci-fi movie. The movie was fine. I watched it for about half an hour and didn't notice anything wrong. At this point, one was relaxed and laughing at myself for getting so horrified by that stupid Lion King tape. Then my heart dropped. In the movie, the titular killers from space are these silly-looking humanoid aliens with big googly eyes. However, the scene of their introduction, which now was playing in front of me, was different. In fact, the aliens were completely changed. The costume looked much more intricate, with meticulous veins running around their now nightmarish inhuman heads. I really can't find a good comparison to describe their form. The heads looked like giant warts of veiny flesh, covered sparsely. In few places with patchy hair. The eyes, which looked hilarious in the original, were the worst, however. They looked organic, they were moving, slightly pulsating, and they stared straight into the camera, no matter the camera angle or scene. Even in moments during which they were supposed to be looking at and talking to the main protagonist, they were instead staring right at me. Their costumes were different also, with long stripes of torn metallic-looking material hanging down to their bent and disfigured lanky legs. In between the torn costumes, I could see a pulsating fleshy mass, which resembled raw meat. Then, just like in the Lion King tape, a new scene began. This time, the picture was clear and the audio was missing. The aliens were leading the main hero through a long corridor, at the end of which stood a huge hangar-like room, or rather, a laboratory. There were hundreds of big glass tubes filled with liquid, and people all around this enormous place. Clearly, this would be impossible to make in the 50s, and if this was supposed to be CG I added later, then even with the VHS distortion and low resolution, it was the most impressive CG graphics I've ever seen. One of the aliens pointed towards one of the tubes. Inside, floating in the liquid, was a woman. Her stomach was wide open, and you could see her insides. After this macabre sight, the camera slowly panned to a smaller tube, which was near the one with the woman. Inside, there was a human fetus, maybe 7 or 8 months old, breathing slowly. This tube was not filled with liquid, and the small figure moved ever so slightly. I could now see that the child was a boy. The camera zoomed in on his face. He then opened his eyes and looked straight at me. I couldn't bear much longer. Completely panic-stricken, I ejected the tape and threw it at the wall. I couldn't care less if I'd broke it. It wasn't normal. Now, I was sure of it, my mind was scattered. I thought and thought about it. Was it another prank? No. Impossible. Nobody could make such a professional and convincing fake, especially considering the fact that the original actors were still in the movie. How the hell could anyone change the aliens that way? And a huge room with all these tubes, CG, impossible. Not in the 50s. Not in the 80s or 90s either. Where did that tape come from? All these questions ran amok in my thoughts while I laid down exhausted on my bed. It was still sunny outside, but I was so tired that almost immediately I fell asleep. Then I had a terrible dream. I was younger, maybe 5 years old, and was staying home alone. It was late at night when, while laying in my bed, I heard a noise coming from the living room. Terrified, my younger self ventures into the darkness, tightly clutching his blanket and looking around with care. There is a light in the living room, and the sound I heard sends me into a fever of shock and panic. The TV static is so sinister that I almost scream right there, but I subconsciously know that I should stay silent, because some other will pounce on me the second I make the slightest noise. I was small and vulnerable. The TV plays all. Of my childhood favorites, Shrek, Lion King, Looney Tunes, but there's something horribly wrong with all the footage I see on the screen. Everything is wrong. Shrek is so grotesque that I can barely look at him. The altered Lion King scene from that tape plays again, and Bugs gets his head blown off by Elmer, not in a comedic fashion, but in a morbid and realistic way. Just, when I'm about to turn the TV off, someone catches me by my hand. I scream, and then I wake up covered in cold sweat. It's late at night, and I must have been sleeping for a long time. The TV was on, and the Super Nintendo was plugged into it and running. The only game for the console that I own, Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, was playing itself. Yoshi jumped around the stage as if he was being controlled by an invisible player. But how? There wasn't even a controller plugged in. Did I turn it on in my sleep? Just when I thought that this was only the demo mode playing, Yoshi ran straight into a piranha plant, and baby Mario started flying away in his bubble, emitting that annoying cry. This time, just as with the tapes, it was different. Baby Mario's cry sounded more like long and painful wailing. It made me feel physically sick. I was in pain. I wanted to cry. There was something about that sound that made me remember something, but I still don't know exactly what. A distant memory. Something I remember from a very long time ago. Soon enough, the entire screen, with the exception of Mario and his bubble, went black. Then he stopped crying. He looked straight at me. Below him, white letters began to form. Slowly, one after another, forming this sentence: every child needs a guardian. I will give you one. Now, 2 weeks later, that TV is somewhere far away from here. I gave it away for free as quickly as I could. I couldn't bear this. I don't know why, but I feel bad about it. I'm afraid that now it torments its new owner just as it did me. This was not the end of misery for me, however. The throwing away of all his junk did not improve my uncle's mental state, and much to the shock and despair of me and my family, he committed suicide. I was so sudden. They found him hanging in his now much cleaner room. He looked way worse than before. He was gaunt and pale. I think it was somehow related to that damn TV. The tapes in the game turned out to be fine. As I tested them again at friends, there was nothing wrong with them. It was the TV my uncle gave me that turned everything it displayed into a nightmare. It sent me these messages for a reason, but what was it? I pondered about the message that game gave me. Who was supposed to be my guardian? Who or what would show me these terrible nightmares? I never really had problems with my parents. They both loved me, and I loved them. The messages I got from that damned TV made no sense to me. Even if it was some kind of a ghost, demon, being, whatever. All of this just baffled me. Now, something else happened after all that. I had a new dream last night. This is the reason I'm writing this down. It was exactly the same as the nightmare I had before, but one thing was different. My uncle was there with me, watching. I felt safe. Not sure if this is the best place to talk about this or not, but I need to get some stuff off my chest. To say that things have been getting weird in my life as of late might not sound like much. However, you must understand my life has always been weird. For as long as I can remember, I've been sleepwalking nearly every night. There has maybe been a dozen or so nights, as far as I can recall, that I didn't. This put a great deal of stress upon my parents, as you might expect. They did their best to give me a shot at a normal life, but ultimately, they couldn't succeed. My nightly activities were always quite intense. I would sneak out of the house and wander off to who dash knows dash where, returning in the early hours of the morning. Whenever my parents would try to do anything to prevent this, I would cry and scream, bash my fists on the door, and do anything I could to either be let out or break out. There was unfortunately no stopping me. I don't remember anything about those nights. I only remember the impact it had on both myself and my family. I struggled to keep my grades up, to make friends, have fun, and even to just be aware of my surroundings. Most of the kids my age would avoid me after the single time another child stayed over at my place during the first grade. No one knows exactly happened, but whatever it was, it caused me to be labeled a freak. After I barely graduated, I went out and got my first and only job. It wasn't much, just flipping burgers at a fast food joint in town. It didn't pay much either, but by the time I was 20, I had saved enough for an apartment and a newer muscle car, neither of which lasted long. By my third month on my own, I was thrown out by my landlord. Apparently, I had been scaring my neighbors in the night with my sleepwalking activities. This led to me sleeping in my car for a night. However, after I woke up in the driver's seat of my car in a different place than where I fell asleep, I quickly realized I needed to get rid of it fast. Sold it for 10 grand to the first person who would buy it for a decent price. Even though I didn't have the title, this might not have been so bad had my parents not skipped town shortly after I moved out. Hell, they even changed their phone numbers. Cutting me out of their lives came across as a little bit extreme to me, but I guess I understand. Nearly 20 years of putting up with my moonlight excursions will probably cause someone to do that. My grandmother couldn't even do a single night of it. I was 16 when my parents tried having me stay with her and her cats for a while. It was barely 6 in the morning by the time my father woke me up to pack my things. I still remember my grandmother crying into my mother's shoulder as I left. I never asked what happened, but I don't think I would want to know anyways. Never saw her again after that day. It's been 7 weeks since I first became homeless. It probably shouldn't come as a surprise that my sudden lack of anything to tie me down has only given more power to my nightly habit. However, I have made my way far from my home in Mississippi and all the way to New York City. I didn't do any of that traveling during daylight hours. In fact, I don't have the slightest clue how I got here so quickly at all. My best guess is that I was sleep hitchhiking. All I do know is that every day I would wake up in a different city instead of the one I drifted off in. Yet still, this is the least of my concern. I actually grew quite fond of exploring new surroundings every day. Traveling has always been something I wanted to do. So now you might be asking, what's the problem then? Well, there's two major ones. First, ever since getting to New York 2 weeks ago, I haven't left. I've still been sleepwalking. I know that for sure by how groggy I am throughout the day. And the fact that I fall asleep in one part of the city only to wake up in another. Secondly, I've been finding things in my backpack that don't belong. To me, now, I know I am homeless and without income, but I wouldn't turn to theft. It just isn't me. Would I pick up a $20 bill if I found it laying on the sidewalk? Sure. Of course I would. But that's not what has been happening. It started small. A cig here, a magazine there, little stuff like that. Lately, it's been more valuable items. Smartphones, watches, you name it. Today, however, I found a wallet. It definitely wasn't mine. It was all pink with little plastic beads, and it had a driver's license belonging to some blonde hair. Blue-eyed, 18-year-old. Girl named Chelsea in it. This, of course, raised red flags in my mind. Did I mug this poor girl in my sleep, or did I just stumble upon it during my witching hour adventures? Either way, I've decided it best that I return the wallet somehow. Not sure if I should just take it to the police station in her neighborhood, or just follow the address on the license. I'm leaning more so towards the latter, as I am curious about the weird note that I found with it. The letters on the small piece of paper look completely alien to me. Honestly, they look more like random shapes as opposed to any actual human language. Still though, I can't help but feel as though they do mean something. Hopefully, speaking to its rightful owner might shed some light on what it means. Also, one last thing. Is the taste of copper in one's mouth a normal symptom of long-term sleep deprivation? Or should I be worried that I have been swallowing coins during the night? First off, my house isn't that big. From the outside, you see a pretty average-sized 2-story house. It's not the biggest house on the block. But it's where me, my wife, and our dog call home. 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, and a basement. Occasionally, I'll notice some strange noises coming from the basement, but I usually figure it's just some animals scratching on the walls outside or something. Lately, however, the noises have been getting louder and more frequent. It's gotten to the point where we can't ignore it anymore. Honestly, we don't usually go in the basement that much. It's mostly served as storage for all our crap. Going downstairs, you'd find stacks of boxes, kayaks, old furniture, stuff like that. Tonight, we were sitting in the living room downstairs when we heard a loud thud from down in the basement. We paused the TV and looked at each other. "What the fuck was that?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe something fell over." I responded. We got up and walked over to the basement door. She was too creeped out to go, so I stepped down while she kept guard upstairs. I can't really blame her. Seeing pitch black leading downstairs was enough to send shivers down my spine. But I got down there and turned on the light. The basement wasn't lit up entirely well. Some of the light bulbs obviously needed to be replaced, and it didn't cover nearly everything, so I had to resort to the flashlight on my phone as well. I was walking around realizing how desperately we needed to organize and dust down here when a shadow darted in front of me and knocked something over. Far too quick for me to make anything out. Jesus fuck. I exclaimed, "Are you okay?" She yelled down, "Yeah, I'm fine." "I think there's an animal down here." I responded, "Are you serious? Get back up here and shut the door. I don't want you to get rabies or something." She said. Right after that, I heard a door click shut in front of me. I looked over to the far side of the wall. There were multiple stacks of boxes that blocked the majority of the wall. But behind them I could barely make out the sight of paneling and some windows. I walked closer. There was definitely something. Here, that wasn't the same concrete wall that was there before. Once I pushed some boxes out of the way, there was no mistaking it. This was the front of a house. A black door. one window on both sides, and white wooden paneling. "Come down here, you have to see this." I yelled up at her. We were both standing in front of this new discovery in absolute awe. After some initial shock, we were discussing how something like this could have possibly showed up when we had never seen it before. "This is creepy as hell. We should go." She said to me, "Wait a sec, I'm gonna open the door." I replied, "Fuck that, I wanna leave now. Let's go stay at my parents'. I've listened to enough paranormal stories to know this can't be good. Plus, there might be a coyote or raccoon in here right now," she stammered. "Oh, please, I doubt there's anything supernatural here. This is where the concrete wall starts," I said, opening the door just to suddenly realize how wrong I was. When the door was fully open and we looked inside, we saw a fully furnished living room, the best way I could. Describe the appearance of this room would be a 50s aesthetic. Not only that, it honestly looked warm and cozy inside. When we stepped inside, I can't explain just how comfortable we felt. This overwhelming sensation of belonging and security washed over us. If it wasn't for the fact that we both knew just how bizarre this was, we might have wanted to stay in there. That feeling we suddenly had was taken over by our grounded sense of reality. This was wrong, and we both knew it. This room shouldn't be here. But it doesn't end here. There's two separate hallways that look like they lead even further in. Not only that, I could see a door that was open and lead even further down. There are more levels to this area. "Can we please leave? This doesn't feel safe at all. Please." She begged me. "What? Come on, we should explore this some more. It's not often that your house gets extra square footage," I said, being the enabler. She was reluctant, but I could tell she wanted to look around just as much as me. And we might have too, if we didn't hear something coming up from the stairs below. Something was sprinting up towards us, barreling and crashing into the walls. As they did, right at that moment, I didn't want to take any chances with whatever might be lurking down here. I grabbed her arm, and we bolted right out of there and ran right upstairs back to our living room. I slammed the basement door behind me when I felt continuous bangs right behind me. They were quick, and they just might have caught us if my reaction wasn't faster. Thank God, me and her were able to run out to our car and get out of there without having to face whatever the fuck that was, as I'm typing this out. We're in the guest room of her parents' house, and we're both really shaken up. Does anyone know what we should do? I mean, we have to go back at some point. We can't just stay here forever. Has anyone ever experienced something like this? Because I'm genuinely at a loss here, hoping someone can help us get our house back, Doc, I just realized. Our dog is still there? As soon as I opened the front door that Friday afternoon, I knew that my daughter Aaliyah wasn't at home. The house had a sort of dusty stillness to it that her 8-year-old presence usually blew up with the force of an atomic bomb. "Honey?" I called down the hallway, but there was no answer. I was starting to get really worried now. Worried in a way that only a newly married, first-time parent can be. I wasn't even really sure what I was afraid of, but it suddenly felt like a chunk of sharp ice had been stabbed into the center of my chest. Only the force of habit made me stop and remove my shoes before I began to search the house. "Honey?" I tried again. After checking the first floor, I went upstairs to the bedrooms. My wife Caroline's phone, wallet, and key ring were still on her nightstand. Her white SUV was in the driveway, but she hadn't left one of her cute doodle cupboard. Notes on the fridge for me. Where the hell could everyone have gone? I was scratching my head and making a second loop of the house when the patio door slid open. "Carolyn." I breathed for the first time in what felt like 10 minutes. Then asked her what had happened. My wife explained that Gabe Morenthal, one of Aaliyah's playmates from down the street, was having a birthday party. It was just a 10-minute walk from our place to the Morenthals, and Caroline had expected to be back before I got home. Of course, with kids, nothing was ever quick or easy, and the short trip had ended up taking over an hour. I was just relieved that she was safe. We had lived in this neighborhood for less than a year, but so far it seemed like exactly the sort of secure, out-of-the-way place we had been looking for. It was bordered on 3 sides by forest, and apart from that, there was nothing around apart from a few warehouses, a pharmaceutical plant, a grocery store, and a gas station. There were plenty of other families nearby too. The Morenthals, the Tremosas, the Redmonds at the end of the street. And the Overtons. Just thinking of the name put a nasty taste in my mouth. Is Leander going to be there? I asked reluctantly. My wife grimaced and told me that every kid in the neighborhood had been invited. We both knew that that meant none of the Overtons had ever missed a chance at a free meal when I first met the Overtons. I thought that my dislike for them was purely aesthetic. They dressed like slobs, let junk pile up in their yard, and argued at the top of their lungs. For the whole street to hear, I had told myself not to be judgmental, to remember that not everyone experienced the same advantages that I had enjoyed. But getting to know the family better only confirmed my prejudice. One Sunday morning, I had come downstairs after my shower to find Leander Overson sitting on my kitchen floor, eating strawberry ice cream from the carton with a spoon. Apparently, he and some other children had been playing with Aaliyah in her backyard when he decided to come in and help himself to whatever he wanted from the refrigerator. This stuff sucks, Leander had shouted, instead of saying hello. Bye, vanilla instead. Then, after Elia had a minor dental surgery later that week, I found her crying on the front porch. Leander had told her that her mouth looked like she'd lost a fight with a pair of pliers. The boy was rude, crude, and had a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush. I would have loved to ban Aaliyah from playing with him completely, but none of the other neighborhood parents were willing to do the same. It seemed that if I wanted Aaliyah to have friends, Leander was the price I would have to pay. Maybe I'll take a walk over there. I sighed, turning back to my shoes. Carolyn grabbed my arm. I was being a helicopter parent, she warned, and besides, it was the Morenthals, the most thoughtful, well-ordered family on the block. Any birthday party they hosted was sure to be a safe one, with the children closely supervised at all times. My wife's words died in her throat, but only after I looked over my shoulder did I understand why. Smoke was drifting above the trees behind our house, and it was coming from around the same area where the Morenthals lived. Moments later, I could smell it as well. A bitter, chemical odor that proved it was no wood fire or out-of-control barbecue. Carolyn and I exchanged a glance and hurried to put on our shoes. As I fumbled with my laces, I dialed Susan Morenthal's number. No answer. Maybe I told myself the fire had nothing to do with the kids, but I had to see for myself. Stay here, I told Carolyn. One of us needs to be in the house in case Ilya comes home, or I might need you to get the car. Keep your phone handy, I reassured her with a kiss on the cheek. It'll be all right. It was harder to convince myself. The pillar of smoke that was rising into the evening sky looked even more ominous from the street, and I found myself running rather than walking toward the Morenthals. The sun was setting, but the evening was still humid, and sweat had pooled on my chest by the time I reached the end of the street. In the back of my mind, I was vaguely aware of a thwack-thwacking sound that reminded me of an axe chopping wood. I wasn't sure, however, until a telephone pole up ahead went down like a felled tree. There was a spark and a boom from its transformer. Then every light in the neighborhood went out at once. The sudden gloom was disturbing, but not as disturbing as what accompanied it, the gleeful, almost maniacal laughter of several young kids. I slowed my pace to a walk, suddenly afraid for reasons I couldn't explain. The windows of the houses on either side of me were all dark and quiet. It was strange, I thought, that no one had come outside to look for the source of the smoke or the outage. Something whizzed by my head. I froze, then barely ducked in time as another object flew my way. A white-hot burst of pain exploded in my knee. The third one had found its mark. It was a rock. "Hey!" I shouted. "Who's throwing stones?" There was no response, and then another barrage of stones zipped my way. I cursed, ducked, and scrambled for cover. From somewhere in the darkness, I heard a childish giggle. I brought a hand to my forehead. It was sticky with blood. Whoever was out there, they had gotten me. Good Nelia was out there too. I squinted out from behind the wood fence where I'd taken cover. There was no sign of the stone throwers, but there was still a whole nother street between me and Morenthal's. I was just about to get moving again when I heard a hiss from the shadowy porch beside me dupst. A gravelly voice hissed, "Get over here." And stay down. I could barely make out the shape of an elderly man laying flat on his stomach and beckoning to me. It reminded me whose house I was crouched in front of Mr. Leo's. The old man was known throughout the neighborhood for keeping his home and yard spotless. Under other circumstances, he probably would have been yelling at me to get off of his lawn. After one last longing look toward the Morenthal's place, I crawled toward him. I needed to reach Alia as quickly as possible, but there was a chance. Mr. Lowe had some information that I might need. He waved me inside, as though he couldn't wait to put a locked door between himself and whatever was happening in our neighborhood. It's the kids. Mr. Leo whispered as soon as I was in earshot. They've all gone crazy. He explained that he had been weeding in his garden when he'd first heard the screams from the far end of the street. He had looked up to see a skinny boy with shoulder-length blonde hair walking into his garage. He had yelled at the child, who I assumed was the Tremos' son Aiden, to stop. Instead, the long-haired boy grabbed a pair of shears from their hook on the wall and ran at Mr. Leo, laughing and snapping them together like a giant pair of scissors. The old man must have seen the disbelief on my face, because he pointed to the leg of his perfectly pressed pants. They were hacked and stained with blood in 3 places. "He's still out there," Mr. Leo warned me, his face pale, and he's not alone. "I've got to go." I shook my head. "My daughter's out there too." As I sprinted through Mr. Leo's living room to sneak out through his patio door, old man shook his head at me. "She might be," he muttered, "but she's not your daughter anymore." The last thing I saw before I left Mr. Leo was a short silhouette standing outside the frail, breakable glass of his front door. It was holding a pair of garden shears. I jumped off of Mr. Leo's balcony and winced as I landed hard on the sloping hill behind. My ankle ached, but nothing was broken. I hoped. I glanced left and right. The quiet suburban houses were just black shadows against the almost nighttime sky. Glass shattered. An orange glow appeared at the end of the block. Another house was ablaze. I'd pulled out my phone to call Carolyn, but it had no bars. Had the kids somehow gotten to the cell towers, too? Just how far had all this spread? I limped into the forest that surrounded the neighborhood, staying within the tree line and looking nervously up the hill while I made my way toward the Morenthals, like a scared animal. I felt safer in the shadows of the woods, but I couldn't stay hidden forever. After just a few more backyards, I would need to make a sprint across the road. In the pale glow of the rising moon, my familiar neighborhood looked twisted, unfamiliar, and wrong. I crept through the ferns and undergrowth until I was just a few from the asphalt. The coast appeared to be clear until I saw another set of lights coming toward me. Torches. Dozens of them. They were low to the ground, and occasionally one would go sailing through the night sky. As though its holder was eager to set things on fire for fun, the torches were being carried by children. There was no sign of Elia, but in the flickering orange light, I saw several faces I recognized. Natalia, the Tremos' daughter. Eric, the Redmond son. The twin Hernandez girls. What I didn't recognize, however, was the expression of cruel joy on every face. The kids had painted themselves with something that might have been blood, war paint, or both. They were dressed up like barbarians going to war. And maybe in a sense they were. After all, the children did have captives. The gruesome little band was marching Mark Tremosa and Talia Redmond along with them, keeping the 2 adults prisoner in the center of the group using a collection of sharp tools. Based on their wounds, Mark and Talia had put up a fight at first. It looked like they were being taken in the same direction that I was going, toward the Morenthal house. I began to creep out of the ferns to follow them, then froze. One of the torch-carrying children kept turning around, scanning the street behind the group. They had a rear guard. How the hell was a band of kids this organized? I had to wait until they were almost out of sight before I made my move. The devastation was even worse on this side of the street. Windows shattered, houses burning, a woman lying face down in her driveway, a puddle of blood beneath her. Was it because there were more families with children on this side of the street? I pushed the unsettling thought out of my head and kept moving. I had to find Aaliyah and get back to Carolyn before it was too late. Soon I could smell even more smoke and see the largest fire yet. It was in the Morenthal's backyard, right where the birthday party was supposed to be. Streamers, balloons, and colorful decorations whipped in the hot wind that blew around the pillar of flame in their center. It was a mountain of furniture and other household items soaked with gasoline and set ablaze. From where I crouched behind the Morenthal's rosebush, I could see small, dark shapes running up to it and tossing more fuel into the blaze. Couch cushions, baskets full of laundry, anything that they could get their hands on. My blood ran cold when I realized that Mark Tremosa and Talia Redmond were also being led toward the fire. What had happened to these kids? And even worse, was Alia somehow part of it? A small grubby hand gripped my ankle. Shay! A familiar voice hissed. You're Alia's dad, right? The kid with the screwed up teeth? There was no maniacal glee in Leander's eyes. He looked scared, confused, and alone, just like me. I nodded Dappa. Other kids have all gone nuts, Leander whispered, as though it wasn't obvious. I didn't have time for this. Is Alia safe? I demanded. I don't know, Leander shrugged. I just took off running. I grabbed the goods first, though. Leander unrolled his stained t-shirt and pulled out a fist-sized chunk of birthday cake, which he then stuffed into his mouth. In front of us, there was a bang and a fiery crash as another piece of furniture was flung into the fire. CK, he said, through a mouthful of crumbs. What? I groaned. I said, she might be in the pickup. Duh. Are you deaf or something? Leander went on to explain that there was an abandoned Prohibition-era truck in the woods that the kids liked to play in. Pushing my fears about tetanus and black widow spiders out of my mind, I asked Leander if he could show me where it was. Sure, he told me. What's it worth to you? There was an odd new smell in the smoky air. Talia Redmond began to scream. I sighed and pulled out my wallet despite the nightmare going on around us. Leander wouldn't budge until I offered him all the cash I had. The shrieks behind me were getting louder, and the children had begun some sort of weird shuffling dance. For all I knew, more bands of rock throwers were still out there, hunting for stragglers like me. Leander stuffed the crisp billfolds into the back of his shorts and waved for me to follow. I always thought of Leander as a sort of pudgy, unathletic bully, but the kid moved with the speed and grace of a panther, rolling his eyes whenever he had to wait for me to catch up. He was headed downhill toward a sewer runoff canal at the back of the neighborhood. It smells like skunk's butthole down here, Leander informed me cheerfully, but there are some cool bugs if you know where to look. And this is where we found all those weird pills. I pinched the bridge of my nose and was about to ask Leander what he meant, but he had already launched into his story. So me, Allie, and Gabe had met at the pickup like usual, right? Only this time there was like this black box inside, like in a freaking spy movie. Gabe wanted to leave it alone, but me and Ollie opened it. There were 2 tubes of pills inside, one white, one yellow. Please tell me that you didn't take any of them. Of course I did. I took one of each. Your daughter dared me to. She dared Gabe too, but he started sneezing real bad after he took the yellow one, so he pussied out. Gabe always pussies out. There wasn't much time to bust his balls about it, though, 'cause this guy in a suit showed up, walking back and forth. Like he was looking for something? He seemed real mad. Of course, we hid. Daddy says when a guy in a suit comes looking for you, it's never for nothing good. Gabe had taken 1 pill, the others had taken 2. Gabe has gotten sick. Alia and Leander were fine. Was that what the pills had contained, Ben? Some sort of infectious disease and its cure? All of the neighborhood kids had been at Gabe's birthday party, and wasn't a pharmaceutical warehouse located just on the other side of these woods. I shook on my phone's flashlight. Apparently I was headed back into the woods, And this time it was going to be a muddy, weed-choked downhill slog. A cobweb stuck to my sweating forehead. Something scurried across the back of my neck. Rough as it was, there was still a sort of path one that the neighborhood kids had probably been using for generations. I could see the truck up ahead, a rusted-out behemoth with one tire sunk into the murky slime of the drainage ditch. It looked like the sort of vehicle that bootleggers might have used to run whiskey during Prohibition. I had no idea how it had gotten here, but one thing was clear. It stuck out like a sore thumb. Had someone been using it as a dead drop to smuggle experimental pills out of the warehouse? Was that what the man in a suit had been looking for? And what the neighborhood kids had stumbled upon? There was movement in the backseat of the truck. A dark shape crawled up onto the roof. I tensed, prepared for anything except what happened next. Dad? It whispered it was Alia. I threw my arms around my daughter. I hadn't realized it, but until that moment, I hadn't really expected to ever see her alive again. We've got to get out of here, I whispered. Come on, let's go find your mom. Hey! I winced at the volume of the indignant shout from behind us. You're not going anywhere without me. Leander ran up and tugged on my sleeve. If I didn't want him to keep making noise, it seemed like I'd have to take him with us when we got back to the street. The light from the great fire had dimmed. The neighborhood was eerily still. I wanted to believe that it was finally over, but I knew better. The grimmer explanation was far more likely. The neighborhood was so quiet because all of the adults in it were dead. Except for Migat, and what about my wife? What about Carolyn? We lived a few blocks away from the Morentals, but whatever this was, it had spread as quickly as breathing. Had she opened her door to some lost-looking child who had rang our doorbell, not noticing the blood-stained garden shears he was hiding behind his back? Or had the sound of shattering glass lured her out of the shower, only to find a gang of hip-high murderers standing in our bedroom, twirling their homemade weapons and looking up at her with sadistic glee? Despite the pain in my ankle, the thought made me move faster. I could feel the questions humming in Aaliyah's mind as she gripped my hand and hurried along beside me. Was Mom going to be okay? Was anything ever going to be okay again? Leon, meanwhile, was taking his time. He'd spotted something on the sidewalk, a discarded cough drop. Maybe, and with a furtive look around, he stooped down, picked it up, and popped it into his mouth. I was turning back around, disgust, when I saw the line advancing toward us. There were more than twice as many children as before. There was a sharp tool in every hand and an awful, vacant smile on every face. What they were doing reminded me sickeningly of rabbit hunting with my father, back when I was their age, moving slowly in formation, making a sweep that would catch any prey that had managed to escape so far. The group advanced slowly, step by step, with the coordination that should have been impossible for kids their age. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and bolt for the woods. But I fought down the urge. Doing so would mean abandoning Carolyn. Just do it, the panic in my gut whispered, as the grim formation closed in. She's dead already, and you know it. All you're doing is lying to yourself and putting your daughter in danger. Alia squeezed my hand even tighter. Even Leander looked up at me, wondering how I was going to get us out of this. The truth was, I had no idea. I was still trying to think of something when a familiar white SUV came crashing through the privacy. Fence up ahead, my wife lowered the automatic window and shouted for us to climb inside. How did you? I started to ask. The lights are out. The neighborhood is on fire. What did you expect me to do? Stay home, hurry up and get in. Carolyn didn't need to tell me twice. Our pursuers were already charging, their weapons at the ready. If we didn't, get out now. We never would. I was barely through the door before Leander scrambled over top of me, shouting at my wife to go, go, go. Once Elia was safely inside, she took his advice, circling back around through the gap she'd created. Our headlights were the only ones on the road, and the air was hazy with smoke. I wondered just how far this infection, if that was what it was, had spread. Had some classmate of Gabe's started feeling sick at the party and called for his parents to pick him up, spreading all this insanity to the rest of the town, maybe even the rest of the state. I stared out the window. stroking Aaliyah's hair and listening to the hammering of my heart. How far would we have to drive before we saw the warm electric glow of civilization again? How long would it be until we saw any other survivors? A sudden jolt from below rocked the SUV. Leander muttered something about typical woman drivers as the tires went flat. I squinted out into the darkness, feeling like I was aboard a ship that had gone dead in. The water. Someone was going to have to get out to see what had happened, and I knew who that someone would be. Warning everyone to stay put, I slipped gingerly out the door. In the red glow of the tail lights, I glimpsed a mesh of chains run through, with nails and other jagged objects on the road beneath us. A homemade spike strip. A trap. Probably one of many. I shook my head at Carolyn. She switched off the engine. No one seemed to be coming out of the lightless houses nearby to ambush us. Not yet, anyway. I climbed back into the SUV and took out my phone dot to my surprise. I had service again. While Carolyn stood watch. I called every emergency hotline I could think of, but all I got was a busy signal. I checked the online forums for our town, and what I found or didn't find was chilling. There were the usual posts about missing cats, porch theft, and a loud bang somewhere, but only up until about 8 p.m. After that, the net had gone silent. An annoying sound from beside me nearly made me jump out of my skin. But it was just Leander. He had found a couple peanuts that had fallen between the seats. He wanted to know how long it was going to be before dinner. Alia looked out the window thoughtfully. We're gonna have to walk, aren't we? She asked that we would, but not yet. First we needed to rest and prepare, and for the moment the inside of the SUV felt safe. While Carolyn stood guard, Leander scrounged around for more food. And Aaliyah looked out the window. I opened the dock and started writing. If none of us make it out of here, I want to leave behind some kind of record, some evidence of what happened here. But as I prepare our bags and look out the window at the empty night, I can't help but wonder whether anyone will be left alive to read it. It started without warning. No trauma or sickness. No bargain struck in a desperate moment. One night, I simply closed my eyes in bed and woke somewhere that wasn't my room. Since then, it has happened every single night. I don't dream anymore. Sleep isn't a slow drift into warmth or a dark embrace. It's a violent extraction. The moment my head sinks into the pillow, I feel it. Something inside me tears free, like my bones are being wrenched from my flesh, but without the mercy of unconsciousness. My chest convulses as though someone is reaching in and scooping out everything that makes me me. There's a sound that comes with it too, but it's not a sound you hear with your ears. It's a tearing scream that comes from inside your skull. My whole body is left behind in bed, still and useless, while whatever is left of my mind gets pulled into the dark. That's where I see him .death, at least. That's who I assume he is. No other explanation would make sense. He is shaped like a man, but he's too tall. His head always bends forward slightly, if the ceiling of the world itself is pressing down on him. His body isn't shadow. It's the absence of anything. Alive or warm. Looking at him feels like looking into the moment before the universe was born. His form ripples and shifts with things I can't describe without sounding insane. There are swirls of smoke that move like galaxies, sparks like newborn stars, flashing into existence before dying in cold silence. The edges of him blur and sharpen, in a rhythm I can't follow, like he is both here and somewhere infinitely far away. He doesn't speak, he just walks, and I have no choice but to follow. The place he leads me to is never the same. Sometimes it's a ruined city where the wind carries voices I almost recognize. Sometimes it's an endless plain of bone-white dust beneath a black sky. Sometimes it's somewhere worse, somewhere that feels like it's looking back at me. I remember every single one of them, writing them all down. But the following entries I've written down are the ones that mattered most. I'll number them by which night it was in order. How many times I've walked in purgatory with death. 1. First time it happened, I didn't understand where I was. I thought I was in a dream, if not for the crystal clearness of everything I was experiencing. I woke standing on something that looked like glass. Not smooth glass, but thick panes that had cracked in jagged webs. Through the gaps beneath my feet, I could see what looked like an ocean turned upside down, suspended above nothing. It churned without sound. Waves rolled over one another and then folded inward into spirals that sank into black holes. Every so often, something moved beneath the water. I only caught glimpses, but they were large enough to darken entire stretches. Of the sea at once, Death stood beside me. He was watching the horizon, though there was no sun, no moon, and no sky. Just a band of pale light in the distance, like dawn frozen in place. "Where are we?" I asked. He didn't answer. The glass stretched endlessly in all directions, broken by holes where entire sections had fallen away into the void. Far off, I saw the twisted remains of buildings, balanced at impossible angles. Some leaned so far they seemed on the verge of falling into the abyss, yet they never moved. We started walking. My footsteps made no sound, but the glass trembled, faintly under my weight. Death never looked at me. "What is this place?" I asked again. "What's happening to me?" This time, he slowly raised his arm and pointed toward the horizon. I didn't see anything there but that pale strip of light. Yet, the moment he pointed, a cold pressure began to build in my skull. After a long stretch of walking, I noticed shapes, moving at the edges of the broken glass paths. At first, I thought they were people, but they were too thin. Their bodies swayed like they were made of cloth filled with water. They had faces, but not the way humans do. Their eyes were just pits, their mouths narrow slits that didn't open. None of them made a sound. One came close enough for me too. See its skin? It was translucent, like the thin membrane of an egg. Something writhed beneath it, pressing out against the surface as if it was trying to escape. "What are those?" I whispered. He didn't respond. He didn't even look. He just kept walking, and I had no choice but to follow. We reached the edge of the glass path where it broke into shards. Below was nothing but the upside-down ocean, stretching into forever. Death stopped there. He didn't point this time. He just stood looking down, and I felt something in my chest begin to pull. The pressure grew until I couldn't breathe, and then, just like that, I was back in my bed. It was morning. My body was drenched in sweat, but the taste in my mouth was the strangest part. Salt water. I woke standing on a road the color of burnt bone. The dirt was fine and dry, yet it seemed to cling to itself in a way that reminded me of ash mixed with oil. When I shifted my feet, it did not scatter like normal soil. Instead, it crumbled, apart in sticky, slow-moving clumps, almost reluctant to be disturbed. The air was heavy, not just thick, but oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing down on my lungs and ribs. Each breath felt like drawing in lukewarm water that left a faint metallic taste on my tongue. It was quiet here, so quiet that I could hear the faint grind of my teeth when I clenched my jaw. The road stretched ahead and behind in a perfectly straight line, dividing an endless expanse of black grass. The blades were long and thin, swaying even though the air around them was completely still. They shimmered faintly, as if absorbing the faintest glimmers of light from somewhere I could not see. When I looked closely, I thought I saw tiny motes, drifting upward from their tips, vanishing before they reached my knees. Above was a sky that made my head ache. At first glance, it was dark, but not the kind of darkness you get from night. It was deep, layered, constantly folding in on itself. Shapes formed in that shifting void, swirling spirals, jagged arcs, patterns like constellations that almost made sense before collapsing into something alien. The folds of the sky moved in slow, deliberate motions like the world above me was a living thing breathing in long intervals. Sometimes the stars that flickered between those folds appeared to be arranged in human shapes, sometimes in geometric patterns, and sometimes in things I did not have words for. The longer I stared, the more I felt my thoughts slipping sideways. Death walked ahead of me, his form swallowing every bit of light from the road. The absence that made up his body seemed to drink in the sky's shifting light, making the galaxies. Inside him burned brighter for brief moments before winking out. He did not look back, but I could feel the pull of his presence guiding me forward. We had been walking for what felt like hours when I saw them, off to the right. Far from the road stood a lone tree. Its branches were bone white and bare, each one curling upward in a way that made it look like a frozen scream. Beneath it huddled a group of figures. They were moving, but not toward us. Even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong. Their bodies were red and wet, strips of flesh hanging loose like clothing torn to shreds. Their faces were exposed, muscle and sinew, and they clawed at themselves with hands slick with blood. Each motion tore more of their own tissue away. They made no screams, only low, constant moans that seemed to sink into the air like smoke into cloth. I stopped Indy, rode and stared. What are they? I asked. Dath did not respond. One of the figures lurched, its head twisting unnaturally far in my direction. There were no eyes, just dark, hollow sockets that glistened faintly. The mouth opened and shut, but the moaning did not match the movement. It was as if the sound was leaking from the air itself. Something pulled at me. Not physically, but in a way that made my chest feel tight, as though the tree itself was drawing me toward it. Without realizing it, I stepped off the dirt road, my foot sinking slightly into the black grass. The second my shoe touched the blades, an arm like a wall of darkness moved in front of me. I froze. Why? I asked. Death turned his head toward me, his gaze sinking into my mind like a cold current. His voice, when it came, was low and hollow, vibrating through my bones rather than my ears. They are not for you. I looked back toward the tree. The flayed figures had stopped clawing themselves and now stood still, all of them facing me. Even without eyes, I could feel them watching. The black grass seemed to twitch beneath my feet. I wanted to ask more, but the pressure began building. In my chest again, sudden, sharp, and inescapable. The tree, the grass, the figures blurred into one smudge of black and red as my vision tunneled. Then I was in my bed. My sheets were damp with sweat. When I swallowed, my throat burned as if I had been screaming for hours. I think I had been. This time, I woke standing in water. It was shallow, only a few inches deep, but it stretched forever in every direction. The surface was perfectly smooth, and every step I took sent ripples racing outward until they faded into the horizon. There was no wind, no sound of waves, just the constant, delicate slap of water against my ankles as I moved. The ground beneath was solid, but I could not see it through the endless. Mirrored expanse above me was an ocean, not clouds, not a sky, but an actual ocean suspended overhead. The water churned and twisted far above my head, lit by shifting streaks of sunlight that seemed to come from nowhere. I could see shapes moving in that vast ceiling of water. Some were long, gliding in serpentine motions, their bodies too large to measure. Others drifted lazily, their bodies bulbous and fringed with translucent tendrils that pulsed faintly like they were breathing. Now and then, something enormous would pass overhead and block out all the light for a moment, and I would see only a silhouette so strange I could not begin to put words to it. Death was beside me, walking through the shallow water without leaving any ripples at all. Why is this happening to me? I asked him. He didn't answer. His head tilted slightly toward the distance, but he kept moving. I tried again. If you're not going to tell me, then I guess I'll just talk to myself. And I did. I talked about how many nights it had been, how my waking hours were starting to feel more like the dream, how I'd stopped telling anyone about my nights because no one could understand. I had talked about the places he'd taken me, the things I'd seen, and the growing suspicion that there was a reason for all of it. My voice felt too loud in the stillness, and yet Death didn't seem to mind. We walked like that for what felt like hours. The water was cold, but it never got any deeper. The horizon never changed. The creatures above us swam on, unaware or uncaring that we were beneath them. Then I saw something on the horizon. At first, it looked like a dark smudge moving slowly toward us. As it grew closer, I realized it was a ship, a massive, weather-beaten galleon, the kind I'd only seen in history books, floating upside down in the ocean above us. No, not upside down. The sky water didn't have an up or down. It just was. The ship was from another time, its wood blackened and rotting, its sails torn into long, fluttering ribbons. Large sections of its hull were missing, exposing broken ribs of timber. It should have been sinking, but instead it glided forward like it was caught on an unseen current. I thought at first it was dragging a normal anchor dock. It wasn't. Beneath it, tethered to a massive chain of rusted iron links, was a cluster of human bodies. Dozens of them, maybe more. They were alive, their chests rising and falling in slow, labored breaths. Each one was bound to the chain by their necks, their wrists, their ankles, so tightly that the iron had cut deep into their flesh. Their skin was pale and waterlogged, their eyes open but empty, gazing at nothing as they were pulled along. The chain dragged them across the shallow water, scraping their bodies over whatever lay beneath. I could see some of them twitch when they hit something sharp, but none of them screamed. The ship passed directly overhead, the chain rattling faintly as it went on. It did not speed up. It did not slow down that we stood there and watched it move past us. The trail of bodies stretching behind like a grotesque comet tail. I don't know how long we watched it. It might still be moving somewhere out there, dragging those bodies until there's nothing left of them to drag. Death turned and kept walking, and I followed. I didn't talk anymore after that. Something is wrong with me. It's been creeping in over the last week, but today was the worst. I've been tired before. Long shifts, bad sleep. But this is different. My body feels hollow, like I've been hollowed out with a dull spoon. My legs shake when I stand too long. My hands cramp when I try to write. I barely made it halfway through work today before my boss stopped me in the hallway. She didn't even ask if I was okay. She just said I looked pale and sick and that I should go home before I dropped dead in the lobby. I've had 3 nosebleeds in the past 2 days. I almost never get them, maybe once every few years. The last one came out of nowhere while I was making coffee, and the taste of iron wouldn't leave my mouth for hours. I'm starting to wonder if these nights with death are bleeding into the days. If some part of me is actually dying piece by piece when I fell asleep tonight, the pull came faster than usual. The place I woke in was open. Not like a field, not like a plain, but so vast that I couldn't even tell where the ground ended and the horizon began. The surface beneath my feet was black stone, fractured in spiderweb patterns, each crack faintly glowing with dim blue light. Above us, the sky was filled with slow-moving clouds that glowed from within, like storm fronts lit by distant lightning. Death stood a few steps ahead, already walking. I caught up to him quickly. "Is there a reason you keep showing me all of this?" I asked. He didn't look at me, but he nodded once. That answer was worse than silence. It confirmed something I'd been afraid to admit to myself. There's a purpose. What has it been? I pressed. Why me? Why these places? What am I supposed to do with any of this? His head turned slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was the low rumble of distant thunder. It is not yet time for you to know. The heat in my chest was sudden. I was tired of waking in strange worlds, tired of walking without answers, tired of feeling weaker each day. Of course it's not time, I muttered, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. It's never time, is it? He didn't reply. I stopped asking questions. We walked on in silence for the rest of the night. The cracks in the stone seemed to pulse faintly with each step we took, like the ground itself had a heartbeat. Somewhere far off, I could hear what sounded like water dripping into an endless pit. When the pressure in my chest returned, I let it take me without fighting it. Back in my bed, my nose was bleeding again. My body is failing me faster than I can keep track of. I am exhausted all the time. My legs feel like they might buckle under the smallest weight. My hands cramp just lifting a pen. My vision flickers, and sometimes I see things that I know aren't there, yet they feel solid. I could have sworn the mailman was missing his eyes today, standing at my doorstep with nothing behind his lids. The worlds I walk through at night are seeping into my days. Shadows move across the walls where there should be none. Faces appear in reflections, and I catch them only for a moment before they vanish. My nosebleeds have become relentless, coming every couple of hours, each one leaving the taste of iron thick in my mouth. I went to bed tonight determined to confront death. I refused to move until he answered some questions. We arrived in the blackened plains without sound, but this time he did not walk. For the first time, he stopped, standing motionless and waiting. I could feel the pull of the landscape, but I did not move. Why are you showing me all of this? I asked in my voice, steadier than I felt. His head tilted toward me. When he spoke, the words were slow, deliberate, and impossibly calm. To prepare you. I frowned, pressing further. For what? He said nothing. He only stood there, impossibly still, his form swallowing light around him. The answer was implied, clear, and yet I dared not say it aloud. I swallowed hard and tried another question. Why is my body getting worse in the real world? Why am I falling apart? He remained silent. Not a nod, not a gesture, only the weight of his presence. The answer again was implied, as if my own failing body and these walks were connected in ways I could not fully comprehend. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain out of me. My chest ached, my muscles trembled, and my head throbbed, but I understood enough. I walked with him, we moved through the dark plains together. The windless air pressed against me. The ground beneath our feet was cracked and uneven, pulsing faintly with an inner glow. I spoke occasionally, but only to fill the silence, knowing he would not answer. And yet, even without his words, I felt it. The reason, the purpose, the inevitability. Each step with him is shaping me, marking me, preparing me for something I cannot name. I do not want to know yet, but part of me knows I already do. When I awoke, my body felt worse than ever. My nose had bled again, my muscles ached, my vision wavered. And still, I cannot stop. I don't know what day it is anymore. The hours of sunlight blur into one another, and the nights follow the same pattern, slipping past me in shapes I can barely name. At first, I could remember every night clearly because each one was unique, strange, terrifying in its own way. But now I have seen all manner of things, horrifying, beautiful, impossible, and the memories overlap like wet paint running together. I am not even sure if this is the 25th night, or if I have been walking longer than that doubt. My body continues to fail me. Each day is heavier, each step slower. My vision flickers constantly, and the hallucinations that haunt me when I am awake have grown sharper, more frequent, more detailed. They are not random anymore. I recognize them for what they are, the fates I have witnessed on the walks. I see glimpses of them everywhere. Faces twisted by pain, bodies suspended in impossible ways, signs of punishments that do not belong to this world. Flayed skin hanging from skeletal frames, limbs bent backward until they snap but never stop. People drowning in shallow pools of water that never stop rising, gasping endlessly as the water fills their mouths, noses, eyes. Bound to red-hot iron cages that sear without ever cooling, screaming silently for eternity. Hung by man-sized fish, hooks through the neck and dangling with others like wind chimes, swaying with an invisible breeze. Bodies sewn together into grotesque patchwork, forming moving walls of flesh. Limbs twisted into knots that defy anatomy. Faces pressed flat against stone as if to memorize their own torment. I have begun to feel something I never expected. I can almost see it. Not in full, not with certainty, but I can glimpse the shape of someone's fate before they reach purgatory. The curve of a spine, the tension in their hands, the way they breathe, it all hints at what awaits. I see it in brief flashes, in moments when the world is quiet and the shadows press closer. It terrifies me more than the walks themselves, because it is mine too, and there's no one to guide me through it. I don't know how much longer I can last like this. My body weakens every day. My nose bleeds without warning. My muscles cramp at the smallest effort, and my mind is fraying at the edges. Yet I still walk. I still follow him, even though I know that the horrors I see are only the beginning, and the ones that await are worse than I can name. Every night brings more. Every night I see more of what lies beyond. I am learning the patterns, the inevitabilities, and with each step, I understand that purgatory is not only a place. It is a truth, and one day it will catch me fully. I can barely remember how long I have been walking. Time stretches thin, bending around me like a fragile pane of glass, and the days and nights are one long, continuous motion of shadow and silence. My body is failing faster now. Every movement makes my head and chest ache. We walked for hours without a word. The ground beneath us was uneven, blackened stone that seemed to pulse faintly with a light of its own. The air pressed close, heavy with the smell of wet iron and ash dot. Finally, I could not hold back the question. Am I going to die? I asked. Death stopped, which was rare. He does not often pause, but now he did, turning his impossible form toward. His voice, low and hollow, rolled through the stillness. Perhaps, someday. I swallowed, my throat dry, and whispered, I imagine it will be soon, with how fast my body is declining. He did not answer. I forced myself to ask another question, even though I could feel the weight of his pressing down harder with each word. Do I really see it? Can I see people's fates in the real world, like it feels like I can? For a long moment, he said nothing. The stillness stretched between us, the black stone and shadow pressing against my chest. Then, finally, in a single word that cut through me like ice, he spoke. Yes. The word echoed in my mind, settling deep in a place I cannot reach. My stomach twisted. My hands clenched at my sides. It was not just a confirmation. It was a warning. I wanted to say more, to ask what it meant, but I could not. I swallowed and followed him, each step heavier than the last. The silence now full an understanding I did not want, yet could not escape. The last night, I do not know how many nights it's been. I do not know if the days even exist anymore. Every moment of my life feels like part of the same endless walk. And the nights have begun to feel like the only reality I can trust. Tonight was different, for the first time. I had a full conversation with death. Not a nod, not a wordless gesture, not a cryptic answer. A conversation. I asked him, again, why this is happening. Why I am being shown all these things, why my body is breaking down, why my mind is fraying. With every passing day, he did not answer with words at first. Instead, he pointed ahead. I followed him across cracked black stone that pulsed faintly beneath our feet, until we reached the edge of a pit. It was impossible. The darkness yawned below us like an ocean with no bottom. I could not see the end, and my mind struggled to comprehend the depth. Even the air around it seemed heavier, drawn downward as if the pit were pulling the world into itself. This is what you have been walking towards, Death said. Why? I asked, my voice shaking. You will find out soon, he replied. I stood at the edge of the pit, my chest tight, the blackness below endless. Why did you lead me here? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Death turned to me, his impossible form shifting with the depth of darkness and stars within him. For a moment, I felt as if he was looking not at my face, but straight into my eyes, into the core of me. It was your choice to follow, he said, his voice low and certain. I am simply the guide. I swallowed hard, staring down into the void. My legs trembled. The weight of inevitability pressed on me. There was no arguing, no bargaining, only the truth of what I had chosen, knowingly or not, and the path that lay before me. I looked into the unending void, my stomach twisting. What happens if I fall? He tilted his head, a movement that seemed impossibly slow and deliberate. His body radiated nothing but emptiness and stars, a universe contained in black. You will not fall, he said, because you will step in. I swallowed hard. My hands were trembling. My chest ached. The pull of the pit was stronger than anything I had felt, a pressure that threatened to drag me into itself even before I moved. And yet, I knew he spoke the truth. I would not fall. I would step. I do not know what waits at the bottom. I do not know if I will survive what comes next, or if I will be changed beyond recognition. But I know I will step, and then perhaps I will finally understand. Even as I write this, I can feel it. My fingers are growing cold with the touch of death, the weight of him pressing into me through the screen. the keyboard, through the air around me. I write not because I think it will save me, not because I can fight what is coming, but because I need someone, anyone, to know. To know that this exists, that it waits, that I have seen it. All day I have seen him. Not in dreams, not in walks through impossible lands, but here, in the waking world. Just out of reach, always near, waiting. I cannot close my eyes without seeing the shadow of him sliding across the corners of rooms, leaning over strangers, brushing past passers-by in silence. It is not that they cannot see him. It is that he does not allow them to see only me. I have been seeing the fates of others for weeks now. I can glimpse them in the twitch of a hand, the curve of a spine, the way someone breathes, and it chills me to know what waits for them. But when I look at myself, there's nothing I can measure, no form I can define, only infinite dark. Beautiful, impossible dark filled with swirling infinities of new and dying stars, galaxies of smoke and shadow birthing and dying within themselves. A universe contained in a single absence of light, and it is me that I know tonight I will step into. The pit. I know it as surely as I know that the air presses heavier on my chest, that my legs shake beneath me, that my body is failing. This is not a choice. It is inevitability. I do not know what awaits at the bottom, but I know it will be the answer. I know that what comes next will be the culmination of every walk, every sight, every whisper of death in the dark. And still, I am not afraid, not fully. There's a strange comfort in knowing the shape of what is to come, in knowing that I will finally see it. Tonight, I will step, and perhaps after that, there will be silence. In this world, a lot of things can drive me insane, and routine is the only anchor that eases my mind. For years, it was the only thing that kept me sane. Wake up at 6 a.m., gym by 6:30, work by 8:30, home by 6 o'clock p.m., dinner at 7 o'clock, in bed by 10 o'clock. A perfect, predictable, controllable loop. It was my shield against a world I felt was constantly trying to chew me up and spit me out. A world of soul-sucking jobs, parasitic landlords who saw me as a walking ATM, and banks that smiled while they bled you dry with interest rates. I had one goal, one single obsession that fueled my rigid existence: to buy my own place. Not just a home, but a fortress. A sanctuary where I was the king, where the rules were mine, and where no one could leech off me ever again. After a decade of scrimping, saving, and living a life devoid of any real pleasure, I did it. I bought my dream apartment that it cost me nearly. Everything I had, a small fortune that represented my entire youth. But it was worth it. A corner unit on the 14th floor of a sleek, modern building. Huge windows with a breathtaking view of the city skyline. It was my jewel, the culmination of my life's work. For the first 3 months, it was paradise. I would stand at the window in the evening, watching the city lights twinkle, and feel a profound sense of peace. I had finally made it. I was safe, that's what I thought, anyway. Until the breathing started, because I lived by such a strict routine, I noticed things. Small changes, tiny deviations from the norm. And the first change was a sound that it would happen only when I was on the verge of sleep, in that quiet, vulnerable space between wakefulness and dream. It was a faint sound, so subtle I thought I was imagining it at first. A soft, slow inhale right by my ear. I'd jolt awake, my heart pounding, but the room would be silent. I'd write it off as the wind or the building's ventilation system, and eventually fall into a restless sleep. Then came the movement. I have a print hanging on the wall opposite my dining table. I eat at the same time every night, in the same chair. One evening, I noticed the print was slightly crooked. I got up, straightened it, and thought nothing of it. The next night, it was crooked again, tilted in the other direction. I started watching the walls as I ate, and I could swear if I unfocused. My eyes just right that I could see them, plexing, a slow, almost imperceptible pulse, like the sides of a giant lung. Things would fall, a book from a shelf. A fork from the kitchen counter. Never when I was looking, always when my back was. Turned, I'd just hear the clatter from the other room, a small, startling punctuation mark in the quiet of my evening. I was also starting to notice how empty the building was. For a new, high-end building, it was practically a ghost town. I rarely saw anyone in the hallways, never heard a neighbor through the walls. The only consistent presence was the building manager. He was an impeccably dressed man, always smiling a placid, empty smile. The odd thing was, I kept seeing him everywhere. I'd see him in the lobby as I left for work, and then a moment later, I'd see him again on the street corner, staring. Up at the building, I once saw him get into an elevator on the ground floor, and when the doors opened on my floor, a perfect copy of him got out. I shook my head, blamed it on lack of sleep, and hurried into my apartment. I wanted rational explanations. The breathing was my own heartbeat in my ears. The walls were the building settling. The falling objects were vibrations from the street below. But the explanations started to feel thin, stretched, like a sheet pulled too tight over a monstrous shape. Soon the phenomena grew too loud to ignore. The faint breathing in my ear at night became a wet, labored, choking sound, a desperate rasping gasp for air that would jolt me from sleep, leaving me drenched in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I started dreading going to bed. Sleep, my sacred sanctuary that renews my sanity, became a nightly ordeal. Got the movement of the walls became undeniable. It was a slow, deep, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation. During the day, it was almost soothing. But at night in the dark, it was horrifying. My apartment was breathing around me. The pictures on the walls would sway. The floorboards would groan and shift under my feet. The whole structure felt organic. Alive? I saw my routine getting destroyed in front of me. I realized my fortress is being conquered as I just watch. My life was no longer a predictable loop. It was a waking nightmare. I was perpetually exhausted, irritable, paranoid. I had to do something. I went to the building manager, the smiling man who was everywhere at once. I found him in his small, neat office off the main lobby. There's something wrong with my apartment, I said, my voice tight with a week's worth of sleepless anxiety. The walls are moving. There are sounds. He just looked at me with that same placid, unreadable smile. His eyes were like polished stones. Sir, this is a brand new building. State-of-art construction. I assure you it's perfectly sound. No, you don't understand, I insisted, my voice rising. It's breathing. I hear it at night. It's keeping me awake. He leaned back in his chair, the smile never wavering. You look tired, son, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Perhaps you just overworked. Stress from work, maybe? It happens. Get some rest. I'm sure everything will seem normal in the morning. His condescending calm, his utter dismissal, it infuriated me. But what could I do? Argue with him? Tell him his building was a living creature? He'd have me evicted for being insane. Thought my next stop was the real estate broker who sold me the place. The man who had shaken my hand and congratulated me on my wise investment. I found him in his swanky downtown office. The moment he saw me, his friendly, professional demeanor faltered. A flicker of something, thought it was fear or recognition, crossed his face before he smoothed it over. Can I help you? He asked, his voice a little too bright. He sold me the apartment on the 14th floor, I said, closing the office door behind me. We need to talk. I told him everything. The breathing, the moving walls, the smiling manager who seems to exist in multiple places at once. As I spoke, the color drained from the broker's face. He started sweating, fiddling with a pen on his desk, refusing to meet my eyes. Look, he stammered when I was finished. I'm sure it's just the stress of a new home. These big buildings, they make noises. Stop lying to me, I snarled. I could feel the control, the rigid discipline I'd built my life on, cracking and splintering. You know something? I can see it on your face. What did you sell me? It's a prime piece of real estate, he said, his voice weak, reciting the sales pitch like a prayer. A great investment, fantastic. View, That's when I snapped. The sleep deprivation, the constant fear, the quiet gaslighting, ... It all erupted in a wave of pure rage. I lunged across the desk, grabbed him by the collar of his expensive shirt, and slammed him back against his chair. His eyes went wide with terror. My life is ruined. I screamed, my face inches from his. My routine is gone. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't think. I have nothing left to lose. So you are going to tell me what the hell is going on, or I swear to God, I will kill you right here in this ridiculous chair. The threat was real. I meant it. In that moment, I was a cornered animal, and I didn't care about anything but getting an answer. He broke. Tears streamed down his face, and he started blubbering, the words tumbling out in a panicked, incoherent stream. I'm sorry. I had to. He made me. Who made you? I roared, shaking him. The manager. The landlord? He's not human. The broker sobbed. The building. It's his. It's a nest. A breeding ground. What are you talking about? The apartments, he gasped, his eyes wild with a terror I was starting to understand. They're not apartments. They're eggs, each one. And they need sustenance. They feed on the life of the person inside. On their energy, their essence, their routine. It breathes you in day after day. The wet choking sound in my ear, the feeling of being drained. It all clicked into a horrifying, impossible sense. It feeds? Until what? I whispered, my rage turning to ice. The broker looked at me, his face a mask of pure, abject horror. Until it hatches. He whimpered. I don't know what comes out. I swear, I don't know. That was the deal. I find him a new tenant, and I never have to find out. I let him go. He slumped in his chair, a weeping, pathetic mess. I walked out of his office. My mind was in shock. An egg. I was living inside. An egg? And it was about to hatch? The idea itself seemed funny. I went back to the building. I didn't know what else to do. I had to face him. I walked into the manager's office without knocking. And I found him. He wasn't alone. The office was filled with chairs. And in every single chair sat a perfect, identical copy of the building manager. There must have been 20 of them. They all had the same placid smile, the same polished stone eyes. They all turned their heads in perfect, silent unison to look at me as I entered. And then my mind just realized, and all the walls crumbled down. My legs gave out. I collapsed to my knees on the plush carpet. What do you want from me? I cried with a broken voice. All of them spoke at once, their voices merging into a single, smooth, impossibly resonant chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once. We want nothing. The deal has been made. You signed the contract. You bought the apartment. The deed is a bond, a promise. The vessel belongs to the occupant, and the occupant belongs to the vessel. Please, I begged. Let me go. I'll give it back. I'll give you everything. You cannot leave. The chorus of voices replied, the placid smiles unwavering. It is bound to you now. It will continue to feed no matter where you go. It is almost time. You have been a most nutritious tenant, so full of order, so much delicious energy to consume. The thought of what was gestating inside my walls, nourished by my own life force, made me want to vomit. So that's it? I just wait to die? Wait for it to hatch? The many identical faces tilted in unison. A flicker of something that was not a smile touched their lips. There is always a choice, the voice said. The bond can be transferred. The deed can be reassigned. What do you mean? Well, the chorus whispered, leaning forward as one. You find a replacement, a new source of nourishment, a new occupant to see the process through to its conclusion. Become a broker for us, find someone to take your place, and you will be free. Free to never know what your apartment will hatch. And so, here we are. I accepted their offer, of course. What other choice did I have? I'm writing this post from a new office, a nice one with a great view. My old apartment is pristine, clean, and empty. Waiting. The breathing has stopped. For me, at least, I can sleep again. My routine is back. My life is my own, and all it cost me was my soul. This story, the one you've just read, it's not a confession. It's not a cry for help, Dot, it's an advertisement. I know you. You, the person reading this late at night, you're like me. You love these stories. You love the thrill, the mystery, the brush with the abyss. You seek out the darkness. You're not afraid of things that go bump in the night. You're fascinated by them, Dot, so I'm offering you a unique opportunity. A once-in-a-lifetime chance to not just read a horror story, but to live one. I have an apartment for sale. A beautiful corner unit on the 14th floor. State of art. Motivated. SELL. I can get you a fantastic price. It's an immersive experience. A home with real character. A place that truly becomes a part of you, Dot. It's waiting for its next occupant. It's getting hungry. Are you interested? The key is waiting. I need to write this down. I need to get it out of my head and into the world because I feel like I'm going crazy. And because I need to warn people, I'm an experienced hiker. I'm not one of those weekend warriors who sticks to the paved, well-marked trails. I like the deep woods, the places where you can walk for a whole day and not see another soul. I had a long weekend, so I decided to tackle a remote trail in a state forest a few hours from my home. My plan was simple. Hike in about 5 or 6 miles, find a good spot, camp for the night, and hike out the next day. Standard stuff, Dot, the hike. It was beautiful. The air was crisp, the sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, and the late autumn sun cast long golden shafts of light through the canopy. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the fallen leaves, the chatter of a distant sparrows, and the wind whispering through the trees. This is why I do it. This feeling of absolute peace, of being completely disconnected from the noise of the world, Dot, after a few hours of steady hiking. I started looking for a place to make camp. I was looking for the usual, a relatively flat spot not too close to the trail, preferably with access to a water source. And then I found it, Dot. It wasn't just a good spot. It was a perfect spot, unnaturally perfect. I stepped off the main trail, pushing through a thicket of ferns, and found myself in a clearing I can only describe as idyllic. It was a perfect circle, maybe 40 feet in diameter. The ground was covered in a carpet of short, soft, vibrant green grass that looked more like a meticulously manicured lawn than a patch of wild forest floor. And the trees formed a perfect, unbroken ring around the clearing. Tall, ancient oaks and pines stood shoulder to shoulder, their branches interlocking overhead like some kind of a dome, leaving this single perfect circle of green open to the sky. It was like something out of a fairy tale. A small rational part of my registered how strange it was. Clearings in dense forests are rarely so symmetrical. The grass shouldn't be so uniform, so soft. But the overwhelming feeling was one of discovery, of incredible luck. It felt safe, protected. The circle of trees felt like a natural fence, a private room gifted to me by the forest itself. I dismissed my unease as my city dweller's cynicism. I had found the jackpot of campsites. I dropped my pack with a contented sigh and set to work. The tent went up easily, the stakes sinking into the soft earth with a satisfying thump. I gathered some fallen branches from just outside the clearing and built a small, neat fire pit in the center. Soon, a cheerful little fire was crackling away, warding off the evening chill. I cooked a simple meal of dehydrated chili and sat on my log, watching the flames dance as the sun set, painting the sky above the circle of trees in hues of orange and purple. This, I thought to myself, is perfect. This is what it's all about, Dot. As true darkness fell, the forest changed, as it always does. The familiar woods of the day became a strange place of shadows and unseen movements. I was snug in my little circle of light and warmth. I felt completely secure. After cleaning up my cook set, I doused the fire thoroughly, making sure every last ember was out, and crawled into my tent. I zipped up the flap, settled into my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. And that's when the perfection started to unravel. It began with the feeling, a strange sensation from the ground beneath me. It was a faint, almost imperceptible movement directly under my sleeping bag. They felt like insects. A whole lot of them moving around just under the tent floor. A low-grade, creepy crawly feeling. I tried to ignore it. I'm in the woods after all. There are bugs. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me and closed my eyes, focusing on the gentle sounds of the night, but I couldn't sleep. The feeling persisted, a constant, subtle wriggling sensation against my back. It wasn't painful. It was just wrong. Then the noises started. They came from outside the tent, from the ring of trees surrounding the clearing. A soft snap of a twig, the dry rustle of leaves. At first, I assumed it was just an animal, a deer, maybe a raccoon. But the sounds were too regular. Snap, rustle, snap. They seemed to be moving slowly around the perimeter of the clearing, like someone is moving around me in the darkness. My heart started to beat a little faster. I lay there perfectly still, my ears straining in the darkness. And then I saw the shadows dot my tent is made of a thin, light-colored nylon. The moon was bright and it cast eerie, dancing shadows of the tree branches onto the tent walls. I watched them, trying to calm my racing mind. It's just the wind. I told myself, the wind is making the branches move. But there was no wind. The air was dead still. Yet the shadows on my tent walls were moving, not just swaying, but actively, deliberately shifting. They were long, thin, finger-like shadows, and they were stroking the outside of my tent. I could see them sliding up the walls, tracing them. Seems like curious, probing fingers. I sat bolt upright, my breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my power flashlight from the mesh pocket beside me. My hand was shaking. I flicked it on, pointing the bright, white beam at the tent wall. The shadow vanished in the glare. I swept the beam around the inside of the tent. Nothing. Just me, my gear, and my hammering heart. I turned the light off. The shadow fingers returned, caressing the thin fabric. I was terrified now. The feeling from the ground had intensified. It wasn't just a vague wriggling anymore. It was faster, more deliberate. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles tapping against the floor of the tent from underneath. I fumbled for the flashlight again. My hands slick with sweat and pointed the beam down at the tent floor beside my sleeping bag, and I saw it. I had come through. Dozens of thin blade-like shoots of the soft green grass had pierced the thick nylon floor of my tent. They were sticking up maybe half an inch like a patch of freshly sprouted lawn. But that wasn't the worst part. They were moving. They were swaying back and forth in perfect, horrifying unison. Swish, 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 a tiny, hypnotic, rhythmic motion. They weren't just blades of grass. They were something else. Cilia. Teeth feelers, testing the air inside my tent. They were trying to find me. I screamed, then scrambled for the zipper of the tent door, my fingers feeling like useless, clumsy sausages. The sound of the zipper was obscenely loud in the silence. I burst out of the tent and stumbled to my feet. In the center of the clearing, whipping the beam of my flashlight around wildly, the clearing was empty. The circle of trees stood silent and still. For a moment, a sliver of hope, of denial, cut through my panic. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I had finally lost it. Then I turned the flashlight back on my tent dot, and the world fell out from. Under me, dot, the tree branches weren't coming from the trees. They were coming from the ground, dot, dozens of thick, dark, root-like tendrils, the color of wet earth had erupted from the soft green grass of the clearing. They were wrapped around my tent, constricting it, squeezing it like a giant boa constrictor. The sleek dome of my tent was misshapen, buckled inwards under the pressure. The roots were fibrous and sinewy, and I could swear I saw them pulsing. With a slow, rhythmic beat, like a network of dark veins, they were pulling the tent downwards into the soft earth, which seemed to be yielding, sinking dot. It looked like my tent was being eaten, digested. And in that moment of absolute soul-shattering horror, I understood. I didn't think. I didn't grab my pack. I didn't try to save my expensive gear, my phone, my wallet. They were all in the tent, A tent that was currently being swallowed by the ground. The only thing I had was the flashlight in my hand and the clothes on my back. I ran. I ran for the gap in the trees that led back to the trail, my feet pounding on the soft, living earth. I felt a strange, sucking sensation with every step, as if the ground itself was trying to hold me back. I crashed through the ferns and onto the hard-packed dirt of the trail, and I didn't stop. The run through the forest was a blur of pure animal panic. The beam of my flashlight bounced and jittered, illuminating a chaotic, terrifying slideshow of dark tree trunks, twisted roots, and gaping black shadows. Every rustle of leaves was the creature, its tendrils slithering after me. Every shadow was its gaping maw. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, until my legs were jelly, until I was sobbing and gasping for air after what felt like an eternity. I saw it. A glint of reflected light through the trees. My car. The sight of that familiar man-made object was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I burst out of the woods and into the small gravel parking area, fumbling in my pocket for the spare key I always keep there. My hands were shaking so violently it took me 3 tries to get it into the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there for a moment, my chest heaving, listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing. I jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. A beautiful, beautiful sound of civilization and escape. I didn't look back. I drove all night, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, not stopping until the sun was up and I was hundreds of miles away. I'm safe now, I guess. I'm in a cheap motel room, but I'm not okay. I close my eyes and I see it. The wiggling grass, the pulsing dark roots, the way my tent buckled and sank into the earth. I think the clearing wasn't a clearing. It was a thing, a living thing. The soft grass wasn't grass. It was a lure, the soft lining of a mouth. The perfect circle of trees wasn't a protective fence. It was the rim of the jaw. And I had willingly, happily set up my camp on its tongue.